basically with UDL, I'm going to talk about the components of it, walk through the steps of UDL, talk about how we can gather information, and introduce ways to implement the components of UDL. So for those who have learned about UDL in the past and are familiar with it, you would remember that it was based on, the idea of UDL was based on architecture and creating access for buildings. So the idea would be that these ways of accessing a building would be thought of before the building was built, put into the design, so it's integrated within the whole structure of the building. And so this is an example of a school, of two schools. One school where it was obviously, access was obviously thought of afterwards. And as you can see, this ramp was built for people who have a physical disability. It's in the back of the school. So it's just an example of how the access was thought about afterwards. As opposed to the school on the right. I never went to a school like this. This is a very fancy school. Maybe it's not even a school. Maybe it's a museum or something. But the access was thought of in the beginning. So it's into like the beautiful design of the whole thing. So it's just some examples and non-examples. UDL is something that's thought of from the beginning. So when we're creating our lesson plans, creating our tasks for our students, and it's also alternatives for everybody in class. It's not just for like one tool that's going to work for everybody. It's not your silver bullet that's going to solve all problems. It just provides access to everybody. And so there might be there's things when it comes to UDL that have benefited, or just the idea of universal design that have benefited people who don't have a disability. So like crosswalk, or sorry, like like on a sidewalk, when you're the kind of little ramp that's on a sidewalk, that's something that benefits everybody. And there's just lots of different tools like closed captioning, where subtitles, people would rather have the subtitles up, even if they don't have a hearing, or they're hard of hearing or anything like that. There's just lots of examples of how these things that are supposed to provide access are really good for everybody to use. So from an educational standpoint, we can think about UDL from its when it comes to instructional goals and methods and materials that we use in the assessments. So just a quick quote, UDL can be simply stated as the design of instructional materials and activities that allow the learning goals to be achievable by individuals with wide differences in their ability to see, hear, speak, move, read, write, and understand English. And then also metacognitive tasks like attending, organizing, and remembering. So one thing that to mention is that I've noticed this working in the school system, that UDL can be adopted by some classrooms and by some buildings. And there's other times where UDL, there's kind of like this, I'm not sure why, but this stigma around it, or it's just like, oh, it's this other thing we need to do. And oh, UDL is not, it's not applicable for some learners. But there is a lot of research that shows that it's a scientifically valid framework. It's something that's effective, impactful, especially for all different types of marginalized populations from a culturally linguistically standpoint, cultural linguistic standpoint. So it provides flexibility in the ways that information is presented. Students can demonstrate their knowledge in different ways. It keeps students engaged, reduces barriers, and also maintains high achievement, because we don't want to change our expectations. It's not about expectations. It's about making sure we hold the same expectations, but we give the students the tools and the opportunities to show their understanding. So that's something I wanted to make sure I was mindful of sharing, that it is scientifically valid. And in the schools you work at, or the schools you will work at, one question to ask the people you're working with is, have you thought about maybe we use like a UDL framework for creating access for this lesson? Or what kind of UDL frameworks do we have as a school? So I kind of talked about this already. This is just kind of the main points about UDL and why it's what it is. And if we're going to break it down in different parts, so those who know UDL, you know this already, and those who are learning it, I'll just give you an example. of how these components of UDL are, what makes them, what is it made up of, and what does it consist of? So there's basically three components of UDL, and it promotes flexibility in how the materials are represented, what kind of ways students can demonstrate knowledge, and then also how we can engage students. So what are the students' interests? What do we know about them? How can we use students' strengths to motivate them and engage in learning? So representation, I feel like this is another thing too, is even though that I've taught and I've done UDL plenty of times, I'm always learning about. The thing is, it's kind of cool, is like we can keep on interchanging these things, these components of UDL, they're all based on like different networks of the brain. So the way our brain is wired doesn't change. We're always going to have different areas when it comes to demonstrating knowledge. An area of our brain that has to do with metacognitive tasks, being engaged, and things like that. So the things that we just need to change is like, how are we going to do those? And that's why UDL is almost something that is long lasting, because our brains will not change, will take a long time for our brains to change, but we have the same brain structure. So what kind of things or tools are we going to use? That's what changes. So for representation, that's basically how we're presenting the material. So that means like we might need to do some pre-teaching. How are we going to access background knowledge and academic language when it comes to certain concepts? How are we going to help students understand and apply and generalize the material? So this is actually a screenshot of some students that I worked with in the past, the classroom that I co-taught in. And they're learning about geometry, and there's an app that we're using to demonstrate knowledge in like in geometry. So you know that there's those boards, those wooden boards that have like the little like nails in them, and you can put rubber bands to make shapes. So there's an app that the students were using to demonstrate their background knowledge in geometry.
GeoBoards.
GeoBoards, thank you. And I think that the app is called GeoBoard. So I'm going to show you an example. So this is actually my co-teacher, a teacher that I co-taught with a while back. I still work with her. She's a coach now, but she's just talking about how we can use UDL to represent different things for our students, especially students who are culturally and linguistically diverse. So I'm going to play it. Let me know if you cannot hear it. It should be okay though. Thinking about students with disabilities or other marginalized identities. The volume okay? All right, I'm gonna keep on playing because I'm not hearing anything.
Yes.
What ways you've been really good with using technology in your classroom over the years. What ways can you provide access and success for those students who have multiple identities and lots of obstacles in school?
So the first thing is to take all those boundaries of they can't. A lot of times we think, well, the student is a emergent reader, so they can't do this. My students can't do this because they have behaviors or whatever. It's getting rid of those things and knowing that all of them, no matter what marginalized thing they have, they really, really can. And it's just first teaching them. It's just like any other skill we've taught our kids, which is stripping it down, teaching them the basics, and then the purpose of why. And so what's great about technology is it provides those access points for all students. So if I have a pre-emergent reader and they can't access this awesome curriculum about space, I can find podcasts, I can find videos, I can find ways for them to access the learning. And I think for me, because I was never a strong reader or enjoyed reading, I found those access points to help me really engage with my own learning. The other thing is I think technology really presents ways for it to be hands-on, which I think a lot of educators don't think of it like that, but there's a lot of manipulating and creating and discovering that I think is really powerful for all of our students. And I always try to build all my lessons on technology with those differentiation strategies that are good for EL students or our special ed students, because I think they're good for all of our students. Is multiple ways of accessing it, multiple ways of displaying the learning, and just showing them how to do that, I think has helped me to be successful with those kids and then giving it to all of the kids. So that way it's not like well, I'm special ed, so I have this different way of doing it. It's no, anybody can record their thinking. Not everybody has to write a paper. They could make a video. So making them just feel really included in their learning alongside their classmates and their peers, which is also important, is just including them, bringing them in, having them be in the classroom with the kiddos.
All right, so that's Kelly. She's talking about a lot of examples of representation. So no matter what kind of learners we have students who are English language learners, students in special education. Those students, we can provide different ways of representing the information so they can access. And Kelly she's really good at using technology in the classroom. I'm not saying that UDL doesn't always have to be technology. So I just want to be clear about that. But it does provide a lot of ways to differentiate instruction and content. So I talked about representation. So now the next part of UDL is action expression. So how we want students convey their learning. How do they demonstrate their knowledge? What ways can we give them to do that? So some examples would be providing different ways for students to respond. So could they respond like with their voice? Could they respond with a video? Could they respond through acting or singing? Using the assistive technology, scaffolding, like graphic organizers are kind of like this thing we don't think too much about, but there's a lot of research that shows that graphic organizers are very impactful for all types of learners, because they provide like this mental scaffolding that they didn't have before. And then once you do the graphic organizer, it provides that construct within their thinking. So it's just something they will always have. So graphic organizers are a great way for students to show their learning. And for giving students an opportunity to monitor their progress is an action expression component too. So this picture this is the students that I work with a while back, and it was hard to get them to write. Writing was like pulling teeth. It was really hard. It was a battle. So one thing to motivate them to demonstrate their knowledge was that they did like a Lego stop motion movie. They did these shorts, and what they do is they create the story through Lego stop motion, and they'd write about the story afterwards. So kind of motivated them like, okay, I switched that. They actually had to write first. Then once they wrote the script, then they could build the Lego stop motion movie. So it motivated them to get the work done, to write, and then they could work on their movie. That was fun. Here's another person that I talked to in the past about this. So this is related to action expression. So what kind of students, how do we help students demonstrate their knowledge? What is needed for that? And so this is her name is Lindsay Grenling. She's a former special ed teacher. She just got her PhD, so she went to school in a doctorate program at the University of Virginia. I've worked with Lindsay a lot over the past couple of years. She's super smart, and she was a really good special ed teacher. So she's just sharing her thoughts about how we can get students to demonstrate their knowledge.
Even when we think about something like evidence-based practices, right? Like, I'm a researcher and I believe in, the way of the power of research and, the importance of finding evidence to support the things that we do within the classroom. That's super important, absolutely. However, an evidence-based practice, first and foremost, is only as good as the person who's implementing it, right? I can take a practice that has exorbitant amounts of evidence to support its use, but I can implement it in a not very well way. And, it's not going to be effective, even though research shows that there's this evidence to support it. If I'm not implementing it effectively, then it's probably not going to have the same outcomes that we're reading about within research.
And would some of that be asking the student, is this teaching practice helping or not?
Absolutely.
Is that almost setting a foundation for the learning? So if I know there's an evidence-based practice can I set up in a way that's going to be accessible and engaging for the student? Would that be part of that?
Absolutely. And I think that's sort of where we get this cross between culturally responsive instruction and evidence-based instruction for students with special needs, right? So we've got a whole slew of evidence-based practices that are effective for students with disabilities across the range of different disability categories. But we still need to be attuned to who those individual students with disabilities are. Where do they come from? What are their backgrounds? What are their interests? What's going to keep them engaged and motivated to learn? Because, I could ask them a billion opportunities. I can provide a billion opportunities to respond. But if not a single one of those questions that I'm asking is something that is intriguing them, chances of them participating in that opportunity to respond are slim to none, right?
So true. So true.
Yep. So that's Lindsay was just talking about like we have these evidence-based practices. You can have the best like practice in the world. You can have some way for students to demonstrate their learning. But if they don't engage with it, if they're not interested in it, then it's really kind of all for nothing. So like I was saying that those students who it was so hard to get them to write, if I want them to do, I don't know, like some kind of writing strategy, it would be really hard. So I had to find a way to make it interesting to them so they're able to demonstrate their understanding. So they could write. It was a little bit harder, but by using like stop motion movie, because I knew they like that, it provided this access for them to be able to show what they knew. So that's example of action expression. And then engagement is our last component. And that's kind of like the so what of learning. So what keeps students engaged? And I'll give you some examples here. And this takes learning about your students. So what interests they have, providing choice in how they demonstrate their learning, self-regulation, like finding ways for them to understand, okay, this is the thing that helps me stay in the learning zone. I'm able to stay in the learning zone by doing these tools. So kind of giving them that responsibility for learning. So you got to learn about your students. You got to figure out what facts you have about them, and just getting them to kind of be okay with doing hard things. And I'll give you an example yesterday. So I was doing observation of a teacher yesterday. She's working with some students for math and basically teaching the students like, this is how you use a calculator. This is how we can use a calculator to work on multi-step problems. So you can use the calculator to do your basic facts, and then that will help you go through like long division or do multiplication. And the kids got really frustrated. It's funny because these kids have cell phones. And so a cell phone I would think is a little bit more complex than a calculator, like the really dinky ones, the really small ones. But they had a lot of trouble with the calculators, like just figuring out what they meant and how they work, which is very fascinating. But so what they did is the teacher had reminded them, you have some self-regulation strategies you can use right now. I know you're frustrated. Could you use some deep breathing? Could you do some different tools to calm yourself down? So that way she's giving them like the self-regulation tools they need to be successful and like just be okay with doing hard things. Let's see here. So the last video I was going to show you, this is Ryan Fell. He's a principal in St. Paul Public Schools, and he was in special education. So he's got the experience of like someone who's in special education. He eventually went into education as a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher, and now he's a principal of what school is he a principal at? Global Arts Plus, I think that's the name of the school. And I think yeah, I'm trying to remember if that was right school or not, but anyway, he talks about how it's important to know, like for me to be able to for that teacher to be able to use those self-regulation strategies with those students, she had to know about them. She had to understand that experience of like when they are feeling frustrated, this is what they do. Here's what we practiced in the past. I know they have a disability in a certain area when it comes to emotional and emotions. So this is what I know about these students. This is what their backgrounds. So this is important for us to be able to engage with students. We have to know about them.
So you and I are both in the St. Paul Public School District, and I think one of the things that I love about St. Paul is the diversity. I say the diversity is the strength of St. Paul. Just seeing so many different kinds of students with so many different experiences and backgrounds, and their families bring so much too when it comes to that. And then, unfortunately, with that, then we have students who have these backgrounds and experiences, but a lot of the time there's a deficit mindset to what they bring, or they're not considered in their when they're being taught in their instruction. So with that said, I was wondering how do you feel like, for educators who are listening, what do you think would be the best way to support those kinds of students?
I mean, I guess just speaking from my personal experience, it's all about relationship. Like,
Yeah.
I consider myself a very, just relational person. Because stuttering. I consider myself a really relational person, and because of my own experience in school and not always feeling like I had a relationship with educators, not feeling like the educators and teachers around me maybe cared or knew what was going on in my life outside of school, that was hard for me. And so when I think about our when I think about our students who don't have the same privileges that I had, and I didn't even realize maybe what those privileges were until later on in life, like I just think about getting to know their experience through not through what I think their experience is, but through what their words are, whether they're a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 21-year-old. Like, what's your lived experience, and how are you operating just through our world, through our community? I think that's huge. And realizing too that, like, even if kids maybe have similar cultural or ethnic backgrounds, like, that doesn't mean their lived experience is the same. And so that becomes a big part of just like making these individual connections as best possible, to support kids, to support their families if you have to, or if you need to, and to get to know them on just on a more individual basis.
Yeah, those are great considerations. I'm taking a lot of notes. This is great. These are great considerations. But I wish more schools and leaders would mention and talk about. So thank you. I
would note too. I just would say, like, how hard I'm realizing that is my new role too. Like, from the role of an administrator, like, traditionally and so often, like, the kids that a principal knows are kids that get in trouble or kids that are not in class or whatever. And like, realizing how different that is than in a classroom where you can make those individual connections with every kid that's in there because you spend so much time with them. But like, there are kids that I might not see very often, or I just don't hear from. And so like, I think that's, as an administrator, like, I'm still working through that. Like, like to build those relationships, and sometimes have to build them quick because of situations rise or whatever. So
I was wondering, like, how can you be proactive because that tendency, that predictable thing where you're probably working with a lot of students who got into trouble. So like, how do you position yourself where you're able to make those connections with others who are not being sent to the office all the time?
Try to be present. I try to be in classrooms when I can, and it gets harder and harder all the time, it feels like, but it's just try to be present and try to be around and sit, walk into a class and sit down at a table and work on the activity or help somebody through something. And that's how I try to be proactive in it. Still feels like there are probably other strategies, other work that I can do to be better at that at this point. So
being present, just being there, I think makes a big difference. So that's great.
All right. So pretty much Ryan was talking about how it's important, like, if we want to engage our learners, we have to make sure that we learn about them first, understand them. So that means, like, we can get facts about our students, what interests them, find out what's relevant by having a strong relationship with them. We can't find out these things, or it's not authentic if we don't have a relationship with them. Because once we figure that stuff out, then we can kind of use that to provide that that access and what's going to engage them. All right, so now from an operational standpoint, like how do we implement these things? There's like these different steps you can use for utilizing UDL. It could be as formal as this, or it could be a conversation you have with your co-teacher or school. There's lots of different ways of going about it, but I'll share kind of a formal way to go about thinking about UDL. So there's 6 steps. Basically, you want to start from the standards and what questions we have. We want to gather facts about our students, their strengths, their interests, their backgrounds and communication skills. We have to figure out like our content. So we have to understand our content when we're trying to teach and what are some possible alternatives. And then we have to differentiate how what kind of alternatives can we show, can students show their understanding, different kinds of assessments, and then engagement in our instructional processes can involve some kind of choice. And then again, like some more assessment, gauging where they're at. And then also reflection. So making sure you know what went well, what did not well, what was a train wreck, and you just move on and focus on something different next time. So some questions to ask when you're thinking about UDL is, what do you want the students to learn? So I think it's very basic question, but it is very helpful. And I had this conversation with co-teachers in the past where we have like these standards and all this activities and things like that. And I have to go back to my co-teacher and be like, okay, what do we want the kids to do again? I think that helps to just ask, like, what is the take home? What are we actually asking them to do? It's not about like having them memorize a whole reading passage or memorize these things. It's about providing a way for them to learn a skill. So yeah, and basically just understanding the big idea of a lesson. We need to gather some facts about students, and that could be a lot of different things: their cultural background, linguistic background, communication skills, social emotional, stamina, and what kind of skills they have for self-regulation. That's helpful to know, because if I have a class who lacks a lot of social skills or a lot of regulation skills, I have to plan for that. Because if you don't plan for those things, like you're kind of lying to yourself about how it's going to go. Like, how do you expect it to go if you have students who are dysregulated and students who lack social skills, and you're expecting a perfect lesson? You probably have to rethink like how you want to approach that lesson. And then what are their strengths and what kind of differentiation is needed? So there's lots of different ways you can gather this information. One thing that I'll suggest to teachers is, have you thought about doing a interview with the parents? Interview the students, ask them what they're interested in, ask them what things that they like, what they're motivated by, how do they best learn at home, do observations. I think this is kind of built into a school that I used to work at, but I used to be able to see a lot of students, because since I worked in 5th grade, I could see those students who were younger than 5th grade. I could see them while they're walking to the hallway, or I could see them as they're interacting with other staff and other students. So I saw that it had a background of how they were. And then when in 5th grade, I kind of had an idea of what kind of kid they were. So the observations can be formal, they can be informal, and it could be a source of connection too, because they see you in the hallway. They're like, oh, Mr. Odima, like I remember seeing you in the hallway, or you worked with my brother or sister. So those observations or those connections are important to gather data. So yeah, relationships are good, but also like remember that every time you're watching kids, when you're interacting with them, you're gathering data too. And then more formal things would be like CBM measures, and then the IEP, looking at the IEP. Next thing would be how we can represent the material. So there's lots of different ways we could present the material. We can present it in different levels, instructional levels. We can think from a multi-sensory standpoint. So we can do we want to use a podcast or use a video or use some kind of sensory? Maybe they need to like touch something or have their, like maybe like put something in their hands. Or we can change the goals that are provided. So what kind of like we can change like the pacing of it. So like about like just one example of many is changing what's expected during the lesson. So do you want them to learn 3 different skills or 1? Do you want to space it out? So those are always we can like change the pacing of what's presented to the students. And we just want to consider like when we're doing these things, we can sometimes what happens is we can over scaffold or we can over support. So just want to make sure we do just enough, and that takes practice. Are there any questions so far? So I've talked about step 1, 2, and 3. Does anyone have any questions about UDL so far?
No.
Okay. So action expression. So this is just differentiating how students show what they know, and we can provide different assessments. And we want to think about like just authentic ways for students to perform or produce the skills. And sometimes one thing is like some teachers get so rigid and strict about how students demonstrate their learning. But like, does it really matter if they're presenting the skill? Like, so that's the kind of the challenge I have is like, if they're demonstrating the skill in a certain way, like, do they really have to write a 5-paragraph essay? Yeah, I mean, that skill is important when they're in college or when they're in high school, but did they really have to demonstrate it by writing 2 pages or 3 pages? Could they have demonstrated a skill in a paragraph, or could they have demonstrated it through like recording their voice or recording a video? So like they still demonstrating the skill, it's just they're demonstrating a different way that's not traditional. And then also just asking, making sure that things are, so I talked about differentiating like how they demonstrate the skill. We also want to make sure that it's like authentic too. So authentic to the learning. And so different examples of that would be, so authenticity means like how connected is it to like the actual skill they're learning or demonstrating in real life. So like for math, having different like having real world word problems would be important. So remember I was talking about the 5-paragraph essay. Like I'm trying to think like what jobs are you being asked to write a 5-paragraph essay? But the student will have to write an application letter at some point to get a job. So I'm not saying that 5-paragraph essays are not important. I'm just saying when it comes to relevance for our students, what's going to be more relevant? Them writing, a long paper, or is it going to be getting a job application, writing that up and applying for a job? So next thing is engagement. Some more questions is it's not just about like what is going to engage our students. We have to learn, like I was showing in the video before, is before we can engage our students, we really have to ask some questions about what choices would be interesting for our students, what is relevant to them, how do they like to assess or show their learning, what kind of plans do we have for differentiating. So those are we're just asking different questions for engagement. To be able to engage, we have to be able to ask those questions. So some strategies we can use here is accessing background knowledge, providing a hook to pull students in. So one thing one thing that lots of teachers do, and I'm sure you do too, is when you start class, you start with a video. You start with something like that will get their attention right away. Like there was this teacher I was observing last year, and all the students were going crazy in her classroom. They're like, it was so chaotic. But once the teacher played a YouTube video that had Fortnite dancing and sight words, it was like a sight word video with Fortnite dancing. All the students lined up and they were copying and saying the sight words. Teacher didn't need to say anything to them. They just knew, they heard the video, they saw the dancing, and they started dancing and saying sight words. So that's the hook. You hook them in. Providing students opportunity for choice, getting students to choose Like, do you want to have a lesson on this, or do you want to have a lesson on this? Like a few couple weeks ago, like, do you want to continue doing class and learn about UDL, or should we save it for next week? Would you rather learn about inclusion first or UDL? So like giving them that opportunity to have some control over what they're learning, giving them choice on individual assignments, and like what kind of ways they can show independent work. And like, I just, again, like want to emphasize, like, okay, I'm not saying that there's certain skills that students need to learn to be successful in academically, but also ask the question, if we're giving a student one choice to show their understanding, is that really important? Do we really have to do it that way? So if you start to think with that mindset, you can provide so many different ways for students to show their learning that were not possible before. So I'm not going to go through all of this. You have a copy of this, but these are just different examples you can use for differentiating through like what to think about when you're differentiating for instruction. And I like a lot of these ideas. These are all great ideas. And I don't use this specific chart, but I will, when I'm thinking about how to teach class at St. Thomas, or I'm thinking about how I'm going to lead a workshop, or how I'm going to work with a reading group at school. I'm thinking about these things. I'm thinking about, okay, am I going to do some kind of game? Am I going to have the instructional arrangement? I'm going to have them work in partners. Am I going to use, what evidence-based practices am I going to use? And then like, what kind of environment is it going to be? Sitting at a small table? Are we going to sit in the hallway? Can we go outside? Can students have opportunity to socialize and chat with each other, work together? And then also like co-teaching, if you're co-teaching, working with other teachers, it's good to have different models. Like, how are you going to like change how you work together with someone? And so all of those things that you do support higher level learning strategies. So the last thing that teachers need to do more often is reflect. So you all do so many things during the school day, you do 100,000 things, but when do we ever get an opportunity to reflect on what just happened to us? So it's really good to like, after a lesson, after the whole school day is over, you have to ask yourself, okay, how did it go? What did they learn? What engaged them? Did that work? Did that not? Maybe you're already automatically doing that, but I just want to make sure that you take the time to reflect on what works and what didn't. How did you feel? How did the students feel? And then also like working with other staff. I like, as a special ed teacher, I'm working with an EL teacher, I'm working with a gen ed teacher, I'm working with a social worker, I'm working with like all different kinds of staff. And so I have to ask myself, how well did the planning go? What kind of model we use for co-teaching? How do we communicate? So those are all things to reflect on.